Alright people, welcome back to askNK, and today we're going to be looking at something you probably have seen, you've heard, you just don't know whether it exists somewhere. You're wondering if you get into something like this, would it, replace your current DCC application, or maybe you're just wondering how should I, integrate this into my workflow. And today we're going to be talking about a tool, something you've known about, or maybe you've not heard about it before. But it is going to be a tool that may probably replace the free tools that you have, or maybe replace the tools that you have right now. And we're talking about CLARA.io or CLARA.io, depending on how you call it. So what is CLARA? It is a tool which is based online, which is a web-based tool. Like we'll always give you like 3D tools which are free or they are online, so that you don't have to invest so much amount into that hardware of yours. And so this is one of those tools that you need to have, or maybe you need to try out. So CLARA.io is a modeling tool which you can use to make models. You can animate those models, and you can render those models using either Vray or OpenGL, or maybe the WebGL, sorry, or maybe some certain type of third-party application, depending on what you're going for. And so how this works is all you need to get is an internet connection, which is obvious, and then you need a browser. And how you can get into using this is you definitely have to go to CLARA.io, sign up, and then automatically you can start modeling for free. And the cool thing is, you can make your models, you can texture them, you can make your UVs there, and you can even animate. And now I'm going to talk about the animation part later in the course of this video. So let's talk about how you can get your hands into this. So once you get registered, they send you an email, you confirm that email, you're in. And the cool thing is, once you start, you have a free set of 3D models that you can make use of. Okay, so you have a free set of 3D models you can make use of, and once you logged in, you're definitely going to have a session like this where you can see the files that you've been working on before. You can even collaborate with other friends, like get them in and share stuff. There is a bunch of tutorials that are here that can also help you get along with it. But if you want me to make videos about this, you can put that in the comment section, and I'm going to make videos about this. So we can talk about the modeling, animation, materials, and other tools that comes with it. And also you can still get these files out, export them, and do other things with it. So let's get into how this entire thing works and how you can work with it. Just before I go, when you open up your own particular part, something like this, you can also like import stuff from, let's say, the desktop application which you have. So if you're using Blender or Maya, Cinema 4D, or 3D Studio Max, even ZBrush, you can actually upload your own files from there. So once you just simply come through and you hit upload, it's going to ask you to choose the files which you want. So the files can either be OBJ, STL, or even Collada or .dae, FBX. These are the ones like JPG, PNG, are more like reference images that you can use, or maybe images that you can use as materials, or just assets that you may want to use directly inside your project. Okay, good. So once that's done, you can go over to your document. That's probably once it's loaded up, you can go over to your document, and then you can continue with whatever you have. One cool feature with this tool, is that once you invite like 5 of your friends, or maybe you have 5 friends which are going to collaborate with you, you are going to have more like a lifetime kind of upgrade to a standard account, which is basically what I'm using. And you can find that here. It says you'll receive a lifetime upgrade to a standard account when 5 of your friends sign up into CLARA.io. So let's get right into it. I'm going to show you the UI, and then you can judge for yourself if this is what you want to make use of. So one of the projects which we were working on previously is this one. So if you look at this, it is very simple, straightforward. And I think this is one of those things that when you look at them, you just think about Lightwave automatically. So if you've used Lightwave, or if you've used Modo before, this is one of those UIs that would strike you as, it looks familiar. Okay, yeah. So from here, where you get to see the general, you can see your Explorer, which is called here, or your hierarchy bar, if some other 3D app called that, or your inspector, or even your outliner like it's called in Maya. Okay, so you can find all of your objects directly inside here. All of the materials that you're using are also saved inside the particle. I like the fact that this is pretty organized, and the renderer which I'm going to be using is Vray. So for the renderer, these are things that you can choose or you can switch to select them when you are about to start doing your rendering. And one way to find them out is if you come over to the renderer, you can come through and choose the WebGL as the renderer of choice which you want, or you can, you know, just simply use Vray, which is the renderer of choice that comes, you know, pre-built into something like this. And this is like your default passes when it comes to render passes, camera passes, and all that. Okay, so every other thing here is pretty simple and pretty straightforward, like you've always worked with other 3D apps. So this is the general, this is more like layout. Here where certain tools are existing, and you can see you can filter by different types directly from up here, and you know, you can type and also search them out. So if things are in different hierarchies, you're also going to find those things, how they are being parented different in different hierarchies around here. So in my light preset, I have all of these lights that are tied up to the light preset. I have my turntable camera, which is tied up to this other one, and things like that. You can see the V-Ray dome light, which I have, which you can see directly from here when I turn this to realistic. You can also change all of this shading options, maybe even by just simply clicking or using 3 on your keyboard, and also 4 on your keyboard to, you know, show the bounding boxes. So if you press 1, you jump back to something like this. And I also like the fact that this tool itself has all of these things that you can find here. So contrary to other tools that, you know, you have to go menu by menu to find them, you can automatically just, you know, select I need something like this, and you can just get a cylinder out and, you know, play with the cylinder and do whatever you want to do with it. So CLARA.io is a tool which I think you should go ahead and try out. So other things that make sense is you can see that once I move my mouse on top of something like this, you can see those shortcut keys that are, you know, tied up to these things here. You can see all of that nicely made shortcuts which are there. And after the space like this particular part reminds me of Cinema 4D, because, you know, they have something like this. After the space, you can now see that of lighting, and then that of materials and rendering. Very, very I wouldn't want to say procedural, but it is quite designed in a hierarchical form. So you model, you light, you do your texturing, your material stuff, and then you go ahead and you render. And the next thing which we're going to see is within the modeling tab. Within the modeling tab, we see something that is pretty similar to what we have here. And this is where I have some sort of questions. The questions what I have is, why would I have 2 different menus when the only thing that changes is just this? I rather want to have something like this, and, you know, just have something like this, or maybe totally nothing here, and, you know, have all of this within this part. And when I go over to modeling, I find only the modeling. When I go over to layout, I find only the layout, and then rendering, I find only the rendering, which, by the way, makes sense for a lot of people. But I don't know, this is my personal opinion. I would like to have something that, you know, if I'm having all of these things in one place, then there may probably be no use for this for the 2 what's it called, workspaces. Okay, there might be no use for the workspaces. This is a personal opinion, guys. So what do you guys think about this? Moving on, if you were making models with something like this, so let's say I make a selection here, and I go over to the modeling tab. Okay, so it makes sense now because you have something selected. So if you go over to the modeling tab, which I also think should make sense because it exists here as well. So if you go over to the modeling tab, you can do basically all of the modeling operations that you typically would want to do in any 3D application, from symmetry to slice to cut to taper to twist to bend, every single thing which you want to do. And because I have just this default cube here, and one thing to note is if you press F on your keyboard, it focuses on it just like you do with 3D with Maya, I think. Okay, with Maya. So if you press F on your keyboard, it just focuses directly on it. If you come over to this part where we have the properties, I can come through and, you know, increase how much length segment I want. So if I make this 10 by 10 by 10, you may not see it because it is in the realistic mode. So if I click on show edges, then you can see that I have them here 10 by 10 by 10. Okay, so all of the properties are for a particular object. You can see all of that properties here, and when it comes to materials and all that, you can also come through and see all of these particular properties within this region there. So the next thing which you would probably want to know is once you're done dealing with stuff like this, so if I click on noise, for example, I selected the wrong geometry, so let's just click on this geometry and click on noise, for example. You can see I have very crazy noise bounces going around, so I can come through and just come through and just simply reduce this. And also, if you've worked with 3D Studio Max before, or maybe Cinema 4D, you would also know that most of the operators that you add, or modifiers that you add as they are called in different apps, you find out that they are all placed in a hierarchical form. Okay, so they are sort of layered, contrary to Maya and Houdini, where some of these things, you can also jump into the node section and find them out. But for here, since you're going to probably be making use of it for free, I think it's something you should take with a pinch of salt. So you can add some stuff here and close them out, or hide them, or reveal them, depending on what you want to create at the end of the day. So for something like the noise, you can take it out, you can put it back in, you can come over to the transform, you can transform your object left, right, back and forth, you can rotate, you can scale, you can change the position of the pivot, you can also change the rotational options. This is something which I talked about in one of the rigging tutorials that I made some time ago. So if you check out the YouTube channel where I talked about the best practices when you have to start animating stuff, you can go ahead and find, they have various rotational order where I talked about Maya being using gimbal, the gimbal rotational method for modeling or animating in Maya. So you can go ahead and check that out. So depending on the application where you're going to be exporting these to, you can, or depending on how you choose to animate, you can also change your rotational order from here. Every other thing here is something that you should try and explore. And once you're done with that, the next thing which you probably want to do is layout. So for something like this, what I did for this was just create just a bit of materials like this. And if you jump over to the layout, one of the things you would notice is, before that, I just noticed that I screwed up somewhere. I forgot to tell you guys how you move around the UI. So my bad. So how you move around the UI is simple. You hold down the middle mouse button, and once you push left and right, you rotate around the scene. Okay. If you scroll in, scroll out, scroll in, scroll out, you zoom in and zoom out. If you hold down Control button, and with the middle mouse button, you will be able to pan around an object. And if you press F, you can simply, jump directly to that object, rotate around the object, and do all of those fun stuff that you want to do. One thing to also note is the mark selection is active, so you can use the mark selection to make selections. Right click at the point where I'm trying this exists with a minimal option. So the options for right click is quite minimal. So you can right click and come through and just create objects and play with objects depending on what you want to do. And for the animation as well, you can come through, right click, clear all the keys on a particular object, and all of those fun stuffs that you may probably want to go ahead and do. Within the layout option, you are going to be able to find some assets that you can make use of. So these are assets that exist. So if I come over to cars, I can get this car assets. If I come over to automotive, it's still basically the same, so you can find some assets here. If I go over to gun, I have a rifle there. If I come over to what's it called, Pontiac, I think there's a Pontiac car somewhere around. So these are assets that exist that you can use to play around your within your layout, or to play around in your scene. Okay, how you assign materials to this is also pretty simple. I can simply have an object selected, or even without an object selected, I can just come through and create a physical material. So for you to see this physical material, it simply means you need to dive down into the material library. So I have a physical material called physical 1, which is a new material that I created, and I can just come through and name this box. So let's just name this box, press the enter key, and then you can simply click, drag and drop. directly on top of this. And how you can confirm that is when I go over to the base and decide to switch the color, you can see this is simple, pretty easy, straightforward way of texturing your stuff. So how we can add textures is simple. We just added the material. So to add textures, you need to come through and then go all the way and import a file. So if I decide to choose a file, I'm just going to find some random textures. So now I have the texture loaded up. So what I can do now is I can just simply select the object, go over to this part where I have material. Here where I have select object, remember initially there was no object. So now I can now see the name of the object called bike 58. Now once I apply bike 58 to this, you know, I'll now see that I have that bike object there. These objects here doesn't really show it because we have the this color. So I'm going to push this directly to this part called white. And if you want to see how this bike was made, there's a video in the channel that explains how this bike was made. The transform tools are pretty simple. They are basically the very standard shortcuts to get your transform tool, which is W, E, and R. So with R, you know, you can do something like this. And if you're coming from Blender, I know you'll be very conversant with the G, S, and R. But for here, it is W, E, and R, which is pretty standard for most 3D apps. So you can get something like this and, you know, play around with this to get your desired result. So this is how you can bring in textures. And if you want to still use the same texture as let's say a specular or something like that, all you have to do is, you know, come through, you know, still select the texture there. So the more textures you load in, then the more you can, you know, get very good stuff out of this. And for the final part, which we'll have to talk about, which I said I'm going to talk about earlier, is you may probably not be able to do one particular thing with this app, which is to the best of my knowledge, I don't really think you can do a comfortable rigging. Maybe because I've not been so comfortable to try something like that using this tool, but I don't really think you can do a very comfortable rigging with a tool like this. Or even if you rig, I don't really think you might have all the fun in the world trying to animate a character using something like this. Of course, you can create joints and joint controls, but then there are certain things that, you know, most of the desktop apps, they do have, which includes like you being able to create tons of controllers and blend shapes and all that stuff. I don't really think you would be able to, you know, create all of those deformations here. Like what we have directly here are things like this, and you know, if I just go on and on, these are basically all we can get. So we have something that has to do with bones. If I go over to the helpers, we have the bones, we have the null, but then we don't have certain deformations. So for that particular fact, I would say you can come through, make your default model, your basic modeling, do your basic stuff, just in case you don't have the entire processing power, or if you're coming into 3D for the first time and you want to get something free, something you can use to finish up your project, or something you can use to learn, you can come over to this app, you know, do all of those amazing things you want to do. And once you're done with them, that's one thing. So you cannot really animate with something like this when it comes to characters that have joint constraints or joints and all that stuff. And speaking of constraints, there is basically no constraint control here. So I couldn't find anything that has to do with constraint. I couldn't also find anything that has to do with a lot of modifiers. So the modifiers here are quite not so vast when you in comparison to what you can find in Maya, Blender, and 3D Studio Max. So the modifiers are not so much, but for the very basic fact of, or for the core fact of, you know, making models, lighting those models, texturing those models, and animating them, definitely, I mean, this app is a complete suite where you can, you know, create things like that. So the next thing is to fire up our renderer. But before we fire up our renderer, we would like to see how we can create lights and cameras. These are things that we've not talked about, and let's talk about them right now. So for you to be able to create lights, you can see directly from this part where we have our layout, that we'll have an area light, we'll have directional lights, and every other kind of lights in between. We've talked about materials, and now we have the other kinds of lights that has to do with V-Ray. Directly here we have a V-Ray dome light, which is what we're using to light this entire scene up. So you can come through and just close it, and now we don't have anything that has to do with V-Ray. And you can see all of these key lights that we have here. I can also come through and turn them all off. So if you come here and you simply click on this button here, or you go over to create lights, standard lights, and create an area light, you can have yourself an area light that you can play with. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And the next thing which you can do is you can also come through, go over to lights, V-Ray light, and also create another V-Ray and also create another area light. And this area light is definitely going to be a V-Ray light which you can play with. So with our area light in position, the next thing which we would want to do is to just see how this looks like in the renderer. And before we do that, we may need a camera. So for this, I may come through and come over to this part, camera, and create a new camera. And this camera is going to be somewhere here. If you want to look through the camera, so let's simply just name this camera and call it cam02. So it is our second camera. I will go over to perspective, cameras, camera 02, and then I would simply move this camera the very way you move your cameras, or the very way you navigate around your scene. A cool thing with this, with the cameras here, is if you're very conversant with Maya, for example, you would notice that once you start moving your camera, once you start moving your scene, once you select your camera, by default, the camera starts moving alongside with it. So you don't need to, learn extra keys for you to be able to move or rotate or navigate around your scene with your camera being selected. So just before we start talking about how you can go ahead and render this stuff, let's just take a look at the camera properties. So the camera properties here are pretty stable, simple. Okay, so I'm going to go through, select this here, and directly from here, so if I just come through, let's talk about the camera properties. If I come through and look here, you can see I can enable lock to target. Okay, so it automatically makes it a target cam, contrary to now where it's a free cam, it is now a target cam. I can use a field of view or depth of field, so which simply means I can change the focus. I can also increase the field of view directly from here. Here we have this as 45. We can go ahead and make it a 70 millimeter. Okay, we can go ahead and make it something like 35, sorry. And also, let me switch this to the camera because I noticed we jumped out of the camera. Okay, so I can come through and change this to 35, which is the field of view. I can also increase the film length to be more like an IMAX, depending on what I'm trying to create. The f-stop is also okay, depending on what you're trying to create. You can also do that. If you make this 50, you see we have much more space. If you turn this down to something like 35 millimeter length, then you have something like this. Okay, let's just go ahead and look at this the way it is. Let's make this selection here, bring this down just a tad. Right, so every other thing in between just deals with what you want to go ahead and play with and create. Okay, so these are the properties that exist with the camera, so you can come through, check them out, do whatever you want to do. And once you're done, we are definitely flying through to do that rendering we have been delaying. And before we do that rendering, one more delay before you do that rendering is, before I start talking about the rendering, which is definitely going to be like the very last part, is this, that when you want to animate, say an object like this, for example, automatically every single thing that has an animation, okay, every single thing that has an animation by default, the keys are probably just saved up here. So if I just simply press the playback button, you can see that I have a keyframe for an object here. If I want to start animating this object by default, what I can do is I can make a selection of that particular object. I can come through, I can right click and set a keyframe. Okay, I can set a keyframe there. Then I can move to, say, frame 40 and translate this key all the way up. And next thing I'm going to do is right click and set another keyframe. And now you can see that the keys are actually yellow. So if you're coming from other 3D apps, keys are basically red, but keys here are yellow. So somewhere like here, I can come through, and push this all the way down. So if you see a frame that doesn't have a saved key, it is seen as orange, but a frame with a saved key is green. So I'm also going to come through and put another key somewhere like this. So you can see we have something like this. Okay. So within the animation tab, what we can find are just very basic stuff that you can see in other 3D apps. Very, very basic stuff. So some things don't exist here. So things that doesn't exist here also when it gets to do with animation for extended animation purposes is there is no graph editor. So it's basically more like your modeling app, and it doesn't have the graph editor. Okay, so you can see something like this, and there you go. And there you go. Okay, so this is basically how you can come through and animate. Sorry, this is basically how you can come through and animate. And if you want to play with the timeline, change the way the timeline looks like and all that stuff, you can come to the timeline editor, and let's say we want to set this timeline to 80, and there we have it as 80. And if we want to make it a loop or reverse or a forward plane, depending on what we want, just those very basic stuff, we can get all of that stuff happening directly here in the viewport real time without hassles. And before we actually do that, let's try and do a subdivision. So I'm going to select this object now. Within this part, you can see we have a mesh smooth modifier, which I added earlier, and you can see all of the transforms, how they built up the entire thing. So I have this subdivision. I'm going to increase the subdivision just like you can do in Blender and 3D Studio Max. I can increase the subdivision to about 3, and there you have it. Or maybe we can actually make it 4 just to have way more smoother edges. And with something like that, if you want to get a much more standard rendering, you need to come through and hit the standard, and that will give you a more bucket-like rendering compared to the rendering that you get when you are doing a progressive rendering. So standard rendering, and then you take a coffee, wait for the cloud Vray stuff to do its job for you. So let's take a quick look at this particular scene where we have a car that is imported directly inside here, and actually this car exists within the CLARA.io, so you can find it, play with it. It's for free. Do whatever thing you want to do with it. And so this car is running, or the renderer for this car is it's actually Vray. So what we're going to do now is just look around, and if this is what we want, if this is exactly what we want, we can simply go over to the material and play with the color. So for example, I would like to get a color like this. Doesn't look bad, does it? Okay, so it doesn't look bad. We're working with a physical material, and that simply means that we can play with the specularity. Okay, we can play with the roughness as well. So I may want to dial that a little bit down. So I'm going to drop it like 0.35. So it's more like a shiny car. Okay, good. So we have that there. And at any point, you can, come over to the rendering tab and just preview this and see what it looks like. Okay, you can always come over to the rendering tab and preview this and see what it looks like. A cool thing with the progressive renderer, is you can still be doing this particular thingy, and once you start making that change, automatically it updates. This is on your web browser, guys. It's not something you have to get offline and start middling with stuff over. This is something that happens on your web browser. Okay, and you can come through, make any kind of changes that you want. If you want to add a clear coat, we already have one there. If you want to add clear coat, if you want to increase the thickness of the clear coat, you can come through, increase the thickness. If you want to dial that down a bit, you can come through and dial that down depending on what you want to do. This is an app which I really think you should try your hands on. Okay, so to other objects that you select, you can also come through, play with those objects as well, see how they work for you, and get the best out of them. So I would like to know in the comment section if this is what you want to spend your time or your effort into? Will this replace your present modeling app, or will it replace your present rendering app? I would like to know what you guys think about this in the comment section below. And if you have questions targeted to this particular app, you can put them down there. If you also have questions about apps you want me to try out, you can put them down there in the comment section, and I will do my best to reach out to you and also try those apps out. And if you like this video, simply give it a like, and don't forget to share with your friends. And if you're new here, you can simply hit the subscribe button, and also don't forget to turn on notification so that once I release a new video, you will be the first to know. And until I see you guys next time with a RANT tutorial, updates, tips and tricks, or anything like this, peace.